All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going on a totally massive chronological journey, really unpacking the chapter of human history that changed absolutely everything. We're going to be zooming way in from the very dawn of human existence right down to the bustling, noisy, and incredibly complex streets of ancient Mesopotamia. It's a story of profound transformation, and we're going to see exactly how our ancestors managed to pull it off.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the dawn of early societies, move into the agricultural revolution, explore tools, trade, and tech, trace the timelines globally, and finally witness the rise of Mesopotamia. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. Dawn of Early Societies, Tracing Human Origins.
You know, the sheer scale of early human history is honestly just staggering. We aren't talking about centuries here. We are talking about millions of years. 6 million years ago, we see Australopithecus fossils. Then we take a huge leap to 1.4 million years ago with the harnessing of fire. Think about how revolutionary that was for warmth, protection, and cooking. And then jumping to 195,000 years before the present, we see the emergence of Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans, right there in Africa. It was this slow, steady, incredible burn of evolution. So, for the vast majority of those millions of years, humans lived a nomadic life. You moved exactly where the food was, hunting, gathering, and crashing in temporary rock shelters. But then, a stark contrast emerges: settled life. Cultivating agriculture, domesticating animals, and actually building permanent structures. It literally took millions of years for humans to stop wandering and start settling. But once they did, wow, it triggered a cascade of revolutionary changes that would alter the planet forever.
Moving right along to Section 2, the agricultural revolution, roughly 10,000 years ago.
Okay, so farming wasn't just some overnight aha moment. It was a very gradual, highly observant, four-step learning process. First, humans were simply gathering wild plants. Then, over generations, they started noticing patterns, learning the seasons, figuring out where and when things grew. Step 3 is the real game changer, intentionally planting the seeds themselves. And finally, Step 4, taking control of the meat supply by domesticating animals like sheep, goats, and cattle. They went from being totally at the mercy of nature to actively managing it.
In this agricultural leap, it wasn't an isolated event. It happened all over the globe. Different regions ingeniously utilized their local environments. In West Asia, they were cultivating wheat, barley, and peas. Moving over to East and Southeast Asia, the climate was absolutely perfect for millet and rice. Down in Africa, millet became a massive staple. Humans all over the world were independently figuring out how to cultivate specific, life-sustaining crops that fit their unique geographic vibe. So why does all of this matter so much? Well, think about it. Permanent architecture, the very concept of a house as a fixed, lifelong dwelling, was essentially invented out of sheer necessity. Once you plant a giant field of wheat, you can't just pack up and leave. You have to stick around to weed it, guard it from animals, and harvest it. Agriculture demanded that humans put down roots, quite literally.
Which brings us to Section 3, Tools, Trade, and Tech, Crafting the Future.
With settled life came something pretty revolutionary: free time. Because communities suddenly had a surplus of food, people weren't spending every single waking hour looking for their next meal. This gave them the time, and honestly the need, to craft heavy earthen pots just to store all that extra grain. And it also completely freed up their mental space for artistic expression, like early animal carvings and some really advanced craftsmanship. These settled communities were innovating at lightning speed. They ground and polished stone to create highly effective mortars, pestles, and hoes to clear land. They started tapping into early metals, like copper. By about 5,000 years ago, they made a massive leap in labor efficiency by harnessing animals to plows and carts. And because they were producing surpluses, they started looking outward, building trade networks for exotic goods like hardened volcanic obsidian, precious stones, and shells across huge distances.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, Tracing the Timelines.
If we look at the sheer momentum of history here, between 8,000 and 7,000 BCE, we see cultivation taking root in places like Greece. Following that, between 7,000 and 6,000 BCE, agriculture really takes hold in the northern Mesopotamian plains. And check out what that agricultural foundation leads to. By 5000 BCE, the absolute earliest temple structures are being built in southern Mesopotamia. The slow, steady spread of farming directly laid the brickwork for monumental architecture. As these little villages blew up into larger towns, the old system of localized bartering, trading a sack of grain for a few pots, started to get way too clunky.
With trade networks stretching across entire regions, humanity desperately needed a universal standard of value. This eventually led to the use of currencies, like ancient Greek coins. It's a huge evolution, right? Representing physical goods with abstract, totally portable wealth.
And that leads us to our final stop today, Section 5, the rise of Mesopotamia, the first cities. Geographically speaking, Mesopotamia comes from Greek, literally meaning the land between rivers, specifically the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. This exceptionally fertile sliver of land, mostly in present-day Iraq, was the absolute perfect incubator. The rivers provided the water for huge agricultural surpluses, which in turn allowed for the dense populations needed to kickstart early city life.
Now you have to understand, these weren't just supersized villages. Mesopotamian cities were entirely new beasts. They developed around grand temples that served as administrative hubs. They became sprawling centers of long-distance trade. But most importantly, they supported diverse, highly specialized populations. You had craftspeople, laborers, powerful priests, and scribes all interacting together. Even mobile pastoral animal herders played a vital, integrated role in the town's economy. It was a complex, buzzing urban machine. And here is the absolute crowning achievement of this era. As these cities became centers of immense trade and heavy temple administration, the sheer volume of information, who traded what, who owed taxes to the temple, how much grain was stored in the vault, became totally impossible to keep track of in human memory alone. The complexity of city life literally demanded the invention of writing. Cuneiform was humanity's brilliant solution to urban data management.
And cuneiform wasn't just a passing fad either, it was a deeply robust system. Cuneiform and the Akkadian language remained in use well into the 1st century CE. It managed entire empires. But eventually it faded, and its secrets were completely lost to time, buried in the sands, until dedicated historians and archaeologists finally deciphered the script in the 1850s, unlocking thousands of years of recorded human history for us to study.
The legacy of these very first cities is so incredibly profound. European scholars and travelers later looked upon Mesopotamia as a kind of ancestral land. Driven by ancient biblical references to places like Sumer, they recognized that this specific strip of land between the rivers was the crucible where the foundational elements of modern society, our laws, our writing, our urban planning, were literally forged.
All right, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you to ponder this massive question pulled straight from our text today. Could humanity have ever built these complex, trade-heavy, legally structured urban societies without first figuring out how to write it all down? Imagine trying to run a city's economy or a global supply chain purely from memory. No way, right? It just highlights how perfectly interconnected human progress is, how a seed planted in the ground 10,000 years ago eventually grew into the written word. Thanks so much for joining me on this incredible journey from cave to city, and keep exploring.